Tonight, King Charles and Queen Camilla interrupted during their visit to Parliament House in Canberra. Hello, I'm Jessica Harmsen, live from Adelaide. This is ABC News. Also tonight, Qantas faces a multi-million-dollar compensation bill for illegally sacking workers during the pandemic. Plans to dramatically reduce what's considered safe levels of cancer-causing PFAS chemicals in our drinking water. And State Cabinet in Whyalla as the Premier demands GFG Steelworks owner Sanjeev Gupta deliver on his promises to the town. A parliamentary reception for King Charles and Queen Camilla in Canberra was shaken by protest today. Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe hurled insults and accusations at the monarch before being escorted out. It disrupted an otherwise carefully coordinated day in the nation's capital, where thousands of well-wishers gathered for a chance to meet the royal couple. Political reporter Stephanie Dalzell has more.
They died for king and country. And now the king honouring them. King Charles and Queen Camilla at the War Memorial in Canberra, starting a day of royal engagements in the capital. Outside, more than 4,000 people waited hours for a glimpse of the pair. Many enamoured.
God save the king.
Some, like 9-year-old alpaca Hefner, less so.
He's met a few famous people over his times.
On the forecourt of Parliament House, a more enthusiastic greeting. 21 shots, salutes and handshakes, with crowds camping out to be part of history. Prime Ministers past and present were inside the People's House for a parliamentary reception. As tributes were paid,
you have stood with us proudly in good times.
And gratefully received.
In my many visits to Australia, I have witnessed the courage and hope that have guided the nation's long and sometimes difficult journey towards reconciliation.
The extent of that highlighted just moments later. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe escorted out of the Great Hall. MPs later condemned the interruption, which didn't mar the sense of occasion for those who'd gathered.
He's a head of state, no matter what people say.
I thanked her for coming all this way. I gave her a tea towel.
King Charles is only the second reigning monarch and the first ever king to visit Parliament House, following in the footsteps of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who opened this very building in 1988. King Charles then held private one-on-one sessions with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, before heading to the CSIRO and observing a simulated bushfire, the real version of which have dominated Australian summers. The climate-conscious king seeking to advance the environmental cause across his 16 visits to Australia.
There we go. Little pat gun.
Laying down more roots for future generations.
If the stomach doesn't get too hot.
Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
Israel has carried out multiple strikes on Lebanon's capital after announcing it would target Hezbollah's financial operations. Shortly after the warning, explosions rocked Beirut. The Israeli Air Force hit at least 10 sites across the city, as well as targets in the Bekaa Valley in the east and near the border in the south. Meanwhile, in Gaza, hopes of a ceasefire are dwindling after an Israeli airstrike left 87 people dead or missing. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran begins tonight's report on the events in Lebanon.
Explosions at the edge of Beirut's international airport, lighting a night sky blanketed in smoke.
We will be attacking a large number of targets in the next few hours and more targets later tonight.
The target, Al-Qad al-Hassan, a sanctioned non-profit the US says the Hezbollah militant group uses to manage its money. Also used by civilians, it has more than a dozen branches in the densely populated capital. It's a second straight day of strikes inside Beirut. Here, the IDF hitting what it says was a Hezbollah intelligence centre and weapons facility, killing 3 of the group's commanders. The US Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin says Washington wants Israel to scale back its strikes on its northern neighbour, particularly in and around Beirut, adding that the number of civilian casualties is simply far too high. These latest strikes suggest that plea from Israel's strongest ally have gone unheard. All the while in Gaza, Israel's offensive in the north continues. The streets of Beit Lahia coated in ghostly grey. The dust of buildings once homes, now piles of rubble.
We were asleep around midnight when it suddenly felt like an earthquake hit the area.
Dozens killed by an Israeli strike in the northern Gaza city.
All those who were martyred here are children, women and displaced people who fled from other areas due to heavy strikes, seeking shelter in what they believed to be a safer place.
Children cowering in hospitals after what they've endured. The Israeli military accused Hamas of exaggerating the death toll and insisted the strike used precise munitions against a Hamas target. The killing of the group's leader, Yahya Sinwar, doing little to slow the relentless barrage in Gaza. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Lawyers say Qantas is facing a compensation bill of hundreds of millions of dollars for illegally sacking workers in the middle of pay negotiations. 1,700 ground crew, including baggage handlers and cleaners, will receive various payouts after being let go during the pandemic.
It was a day that these Qantas workers had been fighting for 4 years. Compensation for being illegally sacked when the airline outsourced their roles as they were preparing to strike.
I can put it behind me now, and it can pay bills that I didn't anticipate.
I expected to be there till I retired, and when this happened, it was an absolute shock.
1,700 SAC ground crew will now receive payouts for what they went through, ranging from $30,000 to $100,000 each.
Marriages have broken down as a result of this. People have lost houses. People have had distress, have had mental illnesses.
Workers will also be compensated for 1 year of lost work after the court found the airline would have legally outsourced their roles in 2021.
This is the spirit of Australia. You dig in when it gets tough and you don't give up. And here we are today having a massive victory.
Altogether, the airline is facing a big bill.
It'll probably end up somewhere between, say, $300 and $350 million in compensation.
While this might sound like a lot, this lawyer says that the company still saved cash by outsourcing the roles.
Well, I think what they've done was the right decision financially because it will have saved them money.
The airline had set aside $70 million for this legal battle, but now it has to go away and figure out the final bill. It says it'll be working with the union through a mediation process, and once again, it's apologised to its sacked workers. The airline is also facing a fine, which will be decided at a later date. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
The Premier says it's time for action rather than talk from the owner of Whalers Steelworks. The state's cabinet ministers travelled to the Upper Spencer Gulf town, meeting locals, workers and unions amid growing concerns about the plant's future. Meanwhile, the opposition has taken aim at the government's plans to build a hydrogen plant near the steelworks. Political reporter Harvey Biggs reports.
After months of rising tensions over the fate of Whalers Steelworks, workers and union leaders met with government ministers today to detail their concerns.
Obviously, everyone's been quite stressed and felt like they're not heard. So today is pretty good that, you know, the workers are able to be heard and for them to actually sit and listen to us.
The Cabinet was also given an update on the steelworks by its owner, GFG Alliance Chairman Sanjeev Gupta, who, in a statement, reaffirmed his company's long-term commitment to transitioning to producing green steel, a more than $1 billion commitment at a time his global empire is facing increasing financial pressure and local contractors have at times struggled to get paid.
We want GFG to succeed. We want GFG to realise the transformation of the steelworks as they have committed to. but it's really the time for action.
The government is planning to build a hydrogen power plant at Whyalla that will, in part, assist GFG in transitioning to making green steel. But the opposition says a state government tender to supply natural gas to the site to support its operations in the first 2 years undermines the project's green credentials.
There will be 50, 100 B-double trucks trucking in gas every day to power this hydrogen gas power station.
In a statement, Tom Koutsantonis says the opposition's figures are invented and on most days there will be no trucks required whatsoever. And in Whyalla, the Energy Minister remained bullish on the government's ambitions for the Upper Spencer Gulf.
What you're seeing created here is a province for green iron, and that green iron is very, very attractive to a lot of international companies.
The future, though, depends on keeping an ageing coal-fired blast furnace going, and right now it's offline and has been for around 2 months. Harvey Biggs, ABC News.
A coronial inquest has heard a young Adelaide woman took her own life after feeling as if the state's health system had let her down. Jenny Matters suffered from an eating disorder. The court was told one nurse asked her for diet tips. Eva Blandis reports.
All Jenny Matters wanted to do in life was to help people. The 24-year-old had just got her nursing degree. But an inquest heard she took her own life after suffering from an eating disorder for 2 years. She was 29.5 kilograms when she died at Belair National Park in May 2021. Jenny had been admitted to the Flinders Medical Centre on various occasions, but her father told the court she was often mistreated, with one nurse commenting on how skinny she was and asking for diet tips. Jenny's heartbroken parents said they hope the inquest will help to shine a light on the lack of state and federal funding for the treatment of eating disorders.
More focus, better training and more resources from the state and federal government. Results from the inquest, it won't all be for nothing.
Counsel assisting told the court there were just 6 specialised eating disorder beds in the state. She told the Deputy Coroner she would hear there were 10 to 14 patients sitting around in general wards like Jenny.
You feel like you're the first one that's ever had an eating disorder when you're in the system because there's no resources available.
The inquest into Jenny's death is expected to go into next week, and we'll hear from several witnesses, including the young woman's treating psychologist at the time of her death. Eva Blandis, ABC News.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing distress, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. 3 police officers have been decorated for bravery during 2 separate incidents in which police were killed and injured last year. Brevet Sergeant Jordan Alale and a fellow officer were stabbed during an altercation in Crystalbrook last May. 6 months later, Senior Constable Rebecca Cass and Sergeant Michael Hutchinson were on the scene in the southeast when Brevet Sergeant Jason Doig was fatally shot. Sergeant Hutchinson was also shot in the altercation, and police say Senior Constable Cass ran into the house when she heard gunfire to help. Police Commissioner Grant Stevens presented all 3 officers with police bravery medals at the Academy last Wednesday. The US presidential election is now just weeks away, with both candidates have been out campaigning for votes in key states.
Happy birthday to you.
Kamala Harris was serenaded by Stevie Wonder as she marked her 60th birthday at 2 church services outside of Atlanta. The Democratic nominee will need strong results in the majority black cities of Detroit and Atlanta to repeat President Biden's 2020 wins in Michigan and Georgia. In suburban Philadelphia, Donald Trump swapped his suit for an apron and learned how to cook fries at McDonald's. Thousands of people gathered outside to watch the Republican nominee serve drive-through customers.
This is fun. I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again. Thank you.
A referendum on whether Moldova should join the European Union is now too close to call. The referendum results, which hang in the balance, are a shock for pro-EU President Maia Sandu, who topped the first round of presidential elections held at the same time. The 2 polls have been overshadowed by fears of Russian meddling amid the war in neighbouring Ukraine. Moldova has alternated between pro-Western and pro-Russian governments since the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. Ties with Moscow have deteriorated under Ms Sandu, who condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Australia is planning to dramatically lower what's considered safe levels of PFAS in drinking water. The so-called forever chemicals have been linked to cancer and take thousands of years to break down.
They're in our clothes, cooking products and makeup. PFAS chemicals have even made it into drinking water. Now health authorities are trying to limit that.
Our goal is to produce the highest quality evidence-based guidelines that will enable the states and the water suppliers to supply safe, clean water.
A growing body of research is linking long-term PFAS exposure to cancer and thyroid issues.
Every day of your life, 2 litres of water per day.
The proposed limits follow a crackdown in the US. Under the guidelines, the safe levels of 4 PFAS chemicals would be slashed, but PFOA, recently declared carcinogenic by the World Health Organization, would still be 50 times higher than America's limit. The forever chemicals have been used across the country, including in firefighting foam. But most drinking water has never been tested for PFAS, so the true extent of the problem remains unknown. However, recent samples taken in Sydney detected some of the chemicals at several water filtration plants.
Drinking water remains safe if it complies with the current guideline.
Authorities say the draft guidelines could mean one supply in the Blue Mountains would not be compliant, and there would likely be more.
I think there will be lots of communities that are out of compliance with that, and we will need to put in solutions.
Technology to remove the chemicals is costly.
The customer bills would increase to reflect the additional costs.
There are legal options available to us. We do want to make sure that the cost to the community of pollution is borne by the polluter.
The proposal's open for feedback and will be finalised by April next year. The onus then falls on state and territory governments to enforce any new standards. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News, Sydney.
Drivers in Australia's 3 biggest cities are painfully aware of the cost of using toll roads. Now a leading industry figure is calling for a shake-up of how those charges are set.
Edwina Hyler used to travel to work on Sydney's toll roads, but when the amount she was paying each week hit $150 in December last year, she quit her job and found a new one closer to home and away from the tolls.
It just wasn't, feasible anymore to pay that kind of money in tolls just to get to work. Like, I'd have to work a day just to pay tolls.
It's a feeling familiar to drivers in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, where toll prices have surged during the cost of living crisis. That's because they're pegged to inflation, and so Transurban earned a record $3.5 billion in revenue last financial year, operating 18 of Australia's 22 toll roads.
Their business is not there for the public good, it's there to make money.
Even in times of low inflation, most of its tolls are guaranteed to rise by 4% a year. A giant of the industry and former Transurban director Tony Shepherd says that deal should be off the table for future toll roads.
Well, I think in new projects, I think we can eliminate it. Now, we put it in originally because the risks were just so enormous, and that was what we needed to get people to be prepared to invest.
Transurban declined an interview and did not respond to questions, but in a statement said,
"Toll prices in Australia and how much they rise have always been determined by state or local governments, as have the charges associated with toll notices and late payments."
The New South Wales government has promised to slash toll prices in Sydney and is now negotiating a new tolling model with Transurban.
If we don't reform tolls, Sydney will become a more congested place to live. It'll be less productive than it should be. It'll have a real impact on people's lives, particularly in Sydney's outer suburbs.
Since Edwina Hyler changed jobs, the state government's introduced a 2-year $60 per week cap on tolls. But when it ends, drivers like her may be back to paying full price. Pat McGrath, ABC News.
Nearly 700 properties in South Australia's far north are still without power. Most of Olympic Dam's mining operations are still shut down after violent storms last week. Broken Hill and other parts of New South Wales are also still disconnected from the grid. And this evening, the sole backup generator providing them with power has started to trip.
The race is on to construct temporary replacements for these transmission towers knocked over during last week's huge storm. Until then, Broken Hill and much of the Far West is relying on a single diesel-powered generator, forcing local businesses to manage their power consumption.
We had to cancel the Sunday evening shows and then now we're closed until the pylons are replaced and the normal electricity generation is back online.
The mines have ceased production since the storm hit, and workers won't return until power from the grid is restored. Miners have the option of using their annual leave or taking leave without pay.
It's a crazy situation to think that people are going to be impacted, you know, with not having any money coming in each fortnight. It's going to hurt a lot of people, yeah.
The New South Wales government has now declared the incident a natural disaster, following pressure from Broken Hill's mayor and the Nationals.
What it will allow is government to compensate and give money back to the people. Also, increase the amount of services.
The Perillia mine is closed. There's 500 workers there being impacted. It's costing the mine $250,000 each and every day, and people are not quite sure what's happening.
The situation has been made worse by the lack of a second functioning generator, with Transgrid confirming that generator number 2 has been out of service since September, with it needing more work to get it back up and running again.
When you've got one connector in and one connector out in one of the most isolated cities, not just in Australia but in the entire world, you need to make sure that you've got backup generation.
The temporary towers aren't expected to be in place for at least another 2 weeks, leaving many here in the dark. Kokahala Connor, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the looming gas supply shortfall threatening how we do business.
Neither New South Wales or Victoria has in place a plan that will adequately address the shortfall of gas.
For every working day, it's about $1,600.
Companies will either have to decide whether to stay in Australia or how they are going to change their manufacturing.
Also, I'll speak to Riley Keough, granddaughter of one of the most famous men who ever lived, Elvis Presley.
Finance now, and soaring gold and silver prices have helped push the local share market and the Aussie dollar higher today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Global uncertainty, both in the Middle East and the US election, has sent investors rushing into precious metals, the traditional safe havens. And that sent gold up 37% in 12 months to a record high, and silver up 45% to a 12-year high. And analysts are predicting that this run for both gold and silver has further to go. Silver jumped a huge 6.3% over the weekend, and palladium 3.7%, while oil fell 2.5%. Now, part of the reason for the run is anticipation that China will eventually announce some decent stimulus for its ailing economy any day now, which is pushing all commodities up and leading to gains by mining stocks on the market, and they underpinned a solid gain on the ASX today. But 2 stocks were dumped for similar reasons. WiseTech Global and Mineral Resources are both dealing with messy scandals involving their founders and CEOs, Richard White and Chris Ellison, respectively. Ellison is accused of tax evasion, and the WiseTech board has been in crisis meetings all weekend dealing with allegations about Richard White's sex life. Investors looked at their watches, made excuses and left both companies today, although WiseTech is still well up for the year, as the chart shows. The US market is in suspended animation awaiting November the 5th, and the stakes are high. American share prices have outperformed all others for 15 years for the simple reason that American companies have captured all of the earnings per share growth in the world since the GFC. It's quite staggering. And the Australian dollar stayed above 67 US cents, 100 yen and $1.10 Kiwi. And that's finance.
In AFL, Port Adelaide have delisted 5 players, including forwards Francis Evans and Quinton Narkle, who've been let go for a second time in their careers. Narkle managed 13 games this season for the Power after being picked up in the 2023 mid-season draft, having previously been delisted by Geelong. Similarly, Evans played 17 games for the club this season after being picked up as a delisted free agent at the end of 2022. The Power also axed defender Tom Cleary after 124 games over 12 years at the club. It feels like the season's only just begun, but with AFLW finals around the corner, there's been mixed reactions to the league's trial of condensed fixturing. After squeezing 11 games into a 10-week home and away season, the players say something needs to change.
After a whirlwind 8 weeks, the AFLW finals picture is becoming clearer.
Not wanting to look too far ahead, but also knowing, we do need to keep winning.
Having won 4 in a row, Melbourne is one of the teams on the cusp of the top 8. The Demons will need to overcome an equally strong Hawthorn, which remains in contention for the minor premiership.
We've had a lot of success and a lot of change this year as well, and I think that it's about maintaining our form, not looking too far ahead, just taking it week by week.
Thursday's battle between the two sides will be the opening game of the competition's Indigenous round, capping off a controversial condensed home and away season with the 18 teams, each playing 11 games across 10 weeks.
I think that there's general consensus that the condensed fixture is probably not something that we'd like to continue with. It just puts a lot of strain on the players and on the clubs themselves.
The league has a guaranteed minimum of 12 matches per team next season and is looking at bringing the season forward to an earlier start to alleviate the fixture crunch.
And hopefully we've learned from this year from a time slot point of view from broadcasting, we can take those learnings forward, but supportive of playing as much football as possible.
It's obviously been a bit of a tough period, the condensed fixture with concussion and injury. We've obviously seen key players go out and find it hard to get up. But I think the overarching philosophy is we want to be playing more footy.
There'll be more footy in more places this weekend, with Darwin and Cairns hosting matches on the first week of the Indigenous round. Fraser Fife, ABC News, Melbourne.
Charles Leclerc has won the US Formula One Grand Prix ahead of his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz. It was the third victory of the year for the 27-year-old from Monaco. Lando Norris had finished third but received a 5-second penalty for passing Max Verstappen off the track. Verstappen was elevated to third position ahead of Norris and extended his championship lead over the Englishman to 57 points. Australian Oscar Piastri finished fifth. New Zealand is celebrating its first Women's T20 World Cup triumph after defeating South Africa by 32 runs in the final in Dubai. Player of the tournament, Amelia Kerr, top scored with 43 as the White Ferns made 5 for 158. Kerr also took 3 wickets as South Africa was restricted to 9 for 126. It was a remarkable turnaround for New Zealand, who came into the tournament on a 10-game losing streak.
I'm really hopeful that tonight's victory can inspire that next generation of not just young girls but young boys as well to pick up a cricket bat, a cricket ball, and the impact of hopefully what tonight we've been able to achieve is going to be long-standing and long-reaching, I think.
Time to check all the weather details now, and tonight's photo of black-faced wood swallows was taken at a waterhole south of Oodnadatta and was sent to us by David Eblin. In the city today, it reached 33.2 degrees just before 4:30 this afternoon after an overnight low of 13.2. Further afield, it was fine across the state before a fresh change moved across the far west this afternoon. Top temperatures ranged from 22 degrees at Neptune Island to 40 at Ceduna and Nullarbor. Cloud over the Tasman's associated with a low that'll continue to send gusty winds over New South Wales coasts and showers over eastern Queensland. That cloud over the south will bring wet weather to southern WA and parts of South Australia and Tasmania. An unstable air mass will produce showers and storms over the tropics and inland WA. Showers for Darwin, Cairns and Hobart tomorrow. A fine day for the other major centres. 38 degrees for Alice Springs, 28 for the national capital. Back home, the change in the west will extend showers over parts of the south later in the day. Top temperatures will be above average, 39 degrees in Oodnadatta and 30 in Port Augusta. A fine and partly cloudy day across the south before those possible showers a little later on. 36 for Renmark and 20 for Mount Gambier. A total fire ban with extreme fire danger for the west coast will remain in place until midnight tonight, as will a strong wind warning for the west coast. A fine day for Adelaide tomorrow with the slight chance of a shower late in the day. 24 for the city, down to 17 overnight. On the waters, northerly winds shifting southwesterly to 20 knots with seas around 1 metre. Sunrise around 6:25 and sunset about 20 to 8. Looking further ahead, a possible late shower on Saturday with a morning shower on Sunday. Otherwise, a fine week ahead with tops around the low to mid-20s. And that's the latest from the Adelaide newsroom. Thanks very much for your company this evening. I'm Jessica Harmsen. Stay with us, 7:30's next.